I always read stories about skinwalkers, now I've killed one. I always read stories about skinwalkers, now I've killed one. I remember back when I was a high school kid reading creepypasta stories, the skinwalker ones always stuck out to me. You know, the ones where the people are in some remote location, then one of them disappears for a bit and comes back different. Then starts baa. Like a goat and they run away blah blah blah. They're all similar, but I found the idea so interesting. Creepy goat beasts that pretend to be human. Sign me up. My only problem with the stories is how helpless the people always were. Sometimes the people would fire a shot, and all it would do is slow the creature down. Fair. But first they would take too long to figure out something is up. Or they would just try to run and hide. That never worked out. I'll admit, skinwalkers are damn scary. I know now from experience. But I also know the only way to beat one is to fight. I do have something to admit, I was a serious addict at the time. Not to one particular thing, I just didn't want to be in my own skin. I wouldn't say I was homeless, more like a nomad. I had some money in the bank and a car, but not much else. Well, except for the copious amounts of drugs. I have 2 years sober now. But this story is from 5 years ago. Even after I fought a fucking monster, I didn't get clean. The scariest monsters are the ones inside of us. But skinwalkers are pretty fucking scary too. Here's my recount, to the best of my memory. It was raining in Detroit. I had been driving back from Canada after getting some exquisite MXE. Cheap and well made, thanks Canada. I figured since it was pouring and getting dark, I'd find an old abandoned house to sleep in. I drove down a few of the roads in the outskirts of the city, dilapidated houses on both sides of me. Many of them had water pouring through their broken windows. Some of them were partially caved in, wear and neglect taking their toll. One was on fire. Detroit really had become a shithole. My best guess was water had gotten into some electrics. I heard sirens in the distance. Good sign though, since that meant electricity was flowing down the block. I drove a bit more, until I saw a house that fit my 3 criteria. It wasn't leaking, it wasn't occupied, and it wasn't on fire. It was a pretty nice house, 1 floor, small but comfortable, red wood paneling on the outside, white bordered windows, even a stone chimney. I went around back through the overgrown yard, picked the miraculously unbroken door, and got out of the rain. I checked the place out and it was like I had walked into heaven. The bedroom had a mattress, the sink wasn't gross and had running water, and there was an electric stove that worked. Today was my lucky day. I unpacked some of my things, threw my sleeping bag on the mattress, and set some water to boil while charging my laptop. See, I told you I wasn't homeless, I liked a bit of comfort in my life. I had my cooler with milk and butter too, so my mac and cheese were damn delicious. And finally, I had my time to get high. It should be noted, I've never hallucinated. Even after taking tons of acid or shrooms, I only had the color effects and swirling. Distortion but not projection. So, imagine my confusion when, sitting in the warm light I had on in a sturdy chair, high out of my mind, I heard a baa sound outside. I wasn't scared, but since when were there fucking goats in Detroit? Weird. But I was occupied, so I got back to watching YouTube on my phone. Morning, I woke up to find it was still raining. Great. I was honestly enjoying my stay in a somewhat furnished house, so I pulled out my laptop and got to some browsing. Of course, I helped myself to ingesting a bit more MXE, plus a bowl or two, and I was quite content. Then I heard a knock on the door. Fuck. We'd always made me paranoid, and while it was slightly negated by the MXE, being in a house I had technically broken into put me on edge. I hope to God it wasn't the police, but I answered the door nonetheless. There stood a man, soaking wet, clearly high. I thought, hey, unless this guy shanks me, we could be best buddies. He wasn't intimidating, a bit shorter than me and scrawny, with unmatched shoes a size too big and uncut scraggly hair. Hey boss, help a guy get out of the cold and rain for a bit. I said sure, who was I to say no? It wasn't my house and we exchanged some pleasantries as he came in. I don't think he was in any state of mind to determine that the house had clearly been abandoned, but even if he was, he didn't say anything. He just sat down in a chair and rode whatever wave he was on. I continued my own browsing, taking a bit more MXE out of sight from him, then offering him to smoke. He happily obliged. I figured another druggie wouldn't care to steal some guy's weed, but a white powder. Even I'd steal that if I saw it. A few hours passed and the rain let up. He thanked me, got up, and left. Another human interaction with no trouble, a win in my book. Since it was around 5, I made myself a cup of ramen and continued on with my never-ending journey of dousing my self-loathing with chemicals. I threw down a bottle of cheaply acquired Rubicon to add to my high, and waited for it to hit. Once the hour of waiting was up, I felt the new sensations flowing through my veins, and laid down to get through a bit of nausea. As I was lying there, something passed through my peripheral vision outside. It almost looked like a goat. I wasn't going to be getting up unless the bed under me was on fire, so I stopped caring. Then came the ba again. My mind, neurons now shooting quickly in succession to recognize any pattern, went right to the stories of skinwalkers. I vividly remembered everything, and a part of me, a small part, wished that I was dealing with one. I fantasized about being in the woods, seeing a friend come back as something wrong. I went through the possibilities, how I would handle it. Plans and plans ran through my brain. Setting wild booby traps, shooting it with a machine gun, and many more I don't remember. Eventually I fell asleep. The next day I felt like absolute garbage. My stomach couldn't handle an entire bottle of cough syrup like it used to. Now I know that I was getting stomach ulcers, but I was still in the midst of my addiction then, so I didn't really care. I drank some milk and took an Alka-Seltzer, popped a few Xanax, and passed out for the next 16 hours. I woke up to loud knocking on the door. I tumbled out of the bed, headed to the door, then noted, it's pitch black outside, raining again, and I don't actually live here. Who the fuck could that be? I got to the door and tried looking through the peephole, but couldn't see a thing. Then I heard the knocking again. Loud and fast, like it was an emergency. I popped back to where my bag was, grabbed my admittedly crummy old gun, and pocketed it. Then I opened the door. There stood the man from the other day, drenched again, looking down at the ground. I asked him if he was okay, and he slowly turned his head up. He locked eyes with me, and a shiver went down my spine. Something was different. "Hey boss, help a guy get out of the cold and rain for a bit," he said as he did the first time, but the slur of his words was gone, and his voice had this strange nasal sound to it. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He walked rigidly now. Much less talkative, he sat down where I offered and just stared at me. Like I was something novel. Like I was something different. I packed and lit up a bowl since he was seriously making me uncomfortable. Then I offered it to him. He stared at me like I had two heads, then took it and inhaled, mimicking me. That was a bad idea. I quickly noticed a few things. He was now coughing so hard it looked like his face was about to come loose. Then it did. Like a kid wearing a Halloween mask that slid to one side. His pupils turned into rectangles. And his hands had ripped open, peeling back like a banana peel, revealing claws. I had just gotten a Skinwalker high. I stared at him, dumbfounded for a second, before the primal part of me took over. I don't know how I pulled it off, but my brain fired the emergency switch, ran to the bedroom, grabbed my bag with everything in it, crushed up an Adderall, snorted it, refocused, ran back to the entry. Saw the goat man Skinwalker, who was now freaking the fuck out and bony protrusions had cracked up through his spine, his clothes had almost ripped entirely off, the beast's chest now a hulking mass of muscle pulsating with anger, growing larger by the second. I ran past and booked it to my car. I threw my shit in the car, and my brain was on ultra speed. Would driving work? No, those things always catch up in the stories. Gun? Not my piece of shit. Fire? Fire would work. I grabbed my spare can of gas from my car, booked it back, and hoped to God that thing hadn't regained its senses. When I entered the door, I realized it had, and it was pissed. The now hooved monstrosity charged right at me, swiping with its claws. It grazed my side, sending searing pain through my synapses. I barely managed to hold onto the can of gas, and tumbled into the bedroom, directly onto the bed. I was apparently bleeding more than the pain was telling me, because I slipped a bit in puddle of my own blood trying to flee to the opposite side of the bed, away from the monster now barreling through the doorway. I flipped the mattress with my sleeping bag up, and the thing started shredding it. It was making unholy screams now, like an elephant was giving birth to a goat that was being mauled by a lion. I managed to pour the gas onto the mattress with one hand, bracing the mattress between myself and the certain death right behind it. The goat beast didn't seem to care, getting covered in gasoline, mattress material, and sleeping bag foam. I let back on the mattress a little, just enough for it to push forward hard. Then I pushed back harder. So hard I broke my wrist. So hard I sprained both ankles. It didn't expect a life and death Hulk strength, and flinched for only a second, but I used that second of fear and drug-induced time dilation to smash through the window behind me. Without even thinking, I flicked open my lighter and threw it in the window. Within a second the room was up in flames. After I ran to the curb, I looked back inside. What I saw in the window was my proudest moment. The monster was engulfed in flames. Not only had the gasoline caught, but the foam and other material had stuck to it and was rapidly searing off skin and muscle. The thing was screaming. It was dying. It was the most metal thing I had ever seen. I took a sigh of relief, then noticed a cool feeling on my leg. I looked down to find an absurd pool of blood under me. The pain hit. I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently, firefighters had found me. I told the police a semi-lie about being a squatter and having someone come at me with a knife, and when I was out they must have started the fire. I was eventually discharged, found my way back to the house, and got in my car. Then I got the hell out of Detroit. So that's how I killed a skinwalker. Or goat man. Whatever you want to call that thing. Yeah, I almost died. But I didn't. Is there a lesson from this? Yes, and here it is because I like to share my opinions. Monsters have to hide in the dark because they're afraid of us. Maybe not individually, but they must have seen what we're able to accomplish as a group. We will turn land bare for resources, create weapons that could annihilate all life, and shoot ourselves in metal tubes into space. We're smart and vicious, and no matter how good any beast gets at murdering, humans have mastered the art. I don't know how to end this triumphant speech, so I am just going to stop writing now. Okay now. Alright, maybe one more sentence. Wait, I almost forgot the classic. Fucking skinwalkers. Let's talk about cryptids. If you're here, then that means we already have at least one thing in common: cryptids. Whether you love them, hate them, or you're looking for proof of them. The fact you're reading this post means you're interested in them too. I'm a cryokeeper of sorts, kind of like a park ranger for the less than normal. I'm generally hired on a case-by-case basis. Communities from a small farming village right up to metropolis-sized cities can call people like me in to investigate strange animal behavior, mysterious disappearances, or unbelievable witness reports, and I or someone like me will go in. Look around for traces of anything left behind that a normal person might have missed. Usually, it's nothing out of the ordinary, but occasionally, there will be something else involved. It might be you notice scratch marks too far up a tree, a sense of foreboding near a particular place, or if you're really unlucky, you might hear the voice of someone you know. That really shouldn't be there. This job is pretty tight-lipped. If I were to say just sit at a bar and start talking about hunting the werewolf spotted in the area, or the siren singing at the local beach, you would either think I'm a total nut job or be too frightened to leave your comfy little condo again. But something is changing in the unseen world just behind ours, something that worries me and has the potential to become incredibly dangerous to those who are unaware of everything around them. So, I thought if I began talking about it, fairly vaguely, but with clarity where it counts, then maybe you'll know the signs when you see them, you'll know not to ignore them, and maybe you'll be able to figure out what to do when you do notice the signs. So, I'll start this cautionary tale where it started for me. 3 weeks ago, in northern England. I forgot what the place was called, but it's a popular place for cavers. This is why I was called in. The area had an abnormally large number of deaths and disappearances in the caving system over the last year. The town officials were at their wits' end. The local pros refused to look any further into the caves, claiming the area that needed investigating, where the bodies had been found, was too far off the public route. No one should have been able to get there at all. The overhead rocks were unstable, the rope lines were frayed, and all the walkways were corroded. They had never led a group near there and had no intention of going in themselves. With pressure from higher governing bodies to close the mine if nothing was done, they caved, pun intended, and called for someone more accustomed to the strange. The local pros agreed to fit me for gear and lead me to the entrance of the closed-off part of the system. No biggie for me. I've had to squeeze through some pretty nasty places with no safety at all. All suited up, headlamp, harness, and radio attached, they lead me to an old iron gate, sealed off with hazard tape and chained together. See, yelled the shortest of my two guides, Malcolm, I think his name was. Look, this place is locked tight, and we're a good 5 maybe 10 minutes from the normal route. How could they end up down there? Pointing downwards from inside the gate, into a great massive expanse of inky blankness. There are not even any light lines here, they couldn't have just wandered down. I won't lie, at this point, I was fairly annoyed with my guides. They had done nothing but bitch, whine, and proclaim it wasn't possible from the moment we got in the car. I really didn't need the headache. I turned and looked him square in the face and told him, "Look, Malcolm, I get that you're concerned about the caves, maybe even a bit freaked out, but it's probably just some wild animal that's found another way in and made itself at home." Which I honestly believed. It was too early in the year for the more dangerous cryptids to already be out hunting. I could probably expect to find a few imps or hobgoblin down there. That is the kind of place to hide out from the bigger creatures until the weather began to cool. A skinwalker maybe, though they typically prefer more wooded areas and only usually take 1 or 2 victims a year. Ignoring the rest of the complaints from Malcolm and the other guide, I asked for the key to the gate and told them I'd be okay from here. I'd radio if I needed any help, not that they would have been much help anyway. Opening the gate was more difficult than I expected. The old rusty lock groaned in protest at being forced to move again, creaking like nails on a chalkboard as I made the tumbler rotate from its resting place. With a hefty shove from my padded shoulder, the rusted closed gate finally opened, and I could begin the work I came here for. As I slowly edged along the walls of the cave, I could see many tiny little eyes staring back at me from crevices and hollow holes in the cave walls. Imps, pretty harmless unless you accidentally hurt one. They tend to be more afraid of humans than we are of them. Like spiders. When I say imp, I don't mean the tiny guy with horns and a tail like you're probably imagining right now. Imps are small, yes, but they are actually a part of the gnome family. The common appearance is that of a small hairy humanoid, except for the head. They like making caves their home as they tend to live off the mushrooms that thrive in dark humid places, even the poisonous ones. If you ever go caving, take a few chestnut mushrooms in your pocket. If you spot small round holes in the rock walls, leave one there, they will love it, and if you happen to find yourself lost, these friendly cryptids will help guide you out of the caves by poking you and pulling your clothes in the direction of the exit, right up until they see human-made lights. They don't like our lights, they're too bright for them. I left a few mushrooms scattered around me to let them know I was friendly, and I didn't mean to hurt them, and carefully made my way forward, being watchful of anything growing on the floor. I didn't want to ruin any food they had grown. After another few minutes of edging along the walls, looking for signs, I spotted something that concerned me. A lot. Deep, evenly spaced scratches along the far wall, like a hand. Not good at all. I took out my mobile, took a quick look around me to make sure there were no imps nearby, before turning on the camera and flash, took a quick picture, and stood perfectly still to examine it properly. I didn't want to risk a misstep and spraining my ankle or worse, by trying to walk a narrow line and look at my phone. Surviving cryptid work lesson 1: know what you're dealing with before it deals with you. I learned early on in my work to try and memorize as many signs for cryptids as possible. After being stuck in a forest with nothing but a mobile phone with no battery, a bottle of water, and a hunting knife for a week, not knowing if I was the one doing the hunting or the one being hunted. Not even knowing what it was I was looking for, I learned fast. I knew this sign and it was nothing good. It shouldn't have been there or that active for that time of year. Wendigo. I wasn't prepared for this. I had nothing with me that could help me. I nervously made my way forward, looking for more signs to either confirm or deny what my anxiety and experience was telling me that it was. But it made absolutely no sense. I mean, sure, this would be a perfect place for a Wendigo, but it was too close to civilization, too close to roads, not to mention Wendigo activity in this area had never been recorded before. And they don't normally mass hunt until late fall in preparation for the long winter shut-in. Which is why in certain areas you might be told hunting in the fall months is prohibited. A small safety net to keep as many people out of its hunting grounds as possible. Surviving cryptid work lesson 2. Learn to know when to run, when to hide, and how to survive. This wasn't normal Wendigo behavior, and the more I ventured in, the more I was convinced. In most cases, when a victim is taken by a Wendigo, it's quickly and quietly. They are superb hunters, but their appetite is unending, which is part of the Wendigo curse. Their victims are usually devoured quickly, starting with the limbs and working inwards. Only in the late fall going into winter do they tend to preserve their prey for any amount of time. But as I crept closer through the cave, my headlamp illuminated several bodies. All still meaty. I had no idea what to do or expect, the next sign of Wendigo certainty. There were bones scattered near my feet. I almost stood on them. That would have been the end of this if I had. Their senses are heightened beyond what we have been able to compare it to so far. If I had stood on one, it would have heard me and instantly known where I was. I would have been just another body in the pile. Wendigo are also in the humanoid category, so the next sign was to check the bones. I slowly lowered myself into a squat position, trying not to move too much or do anything that might make noise. Picked up a large femur bone, male I'm guessing, and checked it carefully in the glow of the headlamp. Yep, sign 2, human-sized bite marks on the bones. It had been scraped clean. I hadn't actually seen the Wendigo yet, thankfully, but I had enough information to know what I was dealing with. Time for lesson 2. Know when to run, or in this case walk slowly and carefully out of that damn cave. I made it back to the main corridor of the cave, where I had seen the imps, and something had really scared them. They were tugging and poking me all the way up to a few feet from the gate, just before I could see the lights from the main tourist route. The imp senses are far better than mine, especially in here. They heard it before I did. The sound of nails on rock clawing its way up, the heavy breathing as climbed into the caves from an unseen opening. Then the screaming. The Wendigo's scream can be deafening, a low thunderous rumble that reverberated through the caves and made my blood run cold. How far was it? Could I get out in time? Why was it here? If this was normal activity, I'd have just told them to close the mines until summer, when it would likely move on to its next hunting ground. I knew I'd have to go back, but a lot more prepared. I knew what I was dealing with now. It would be difficult, dangerous, and maybe deadly if I made even a slight mistake. But this wasn't right. It shouldn't be here. I had to know why.